title for the message today is Lessons in Blessing and Righteousness. Lessons in Blessing and Righteousness. And I think that's a good title, but it's more like Lessons in Righteousness. Blessings comes in there a little bit, but if I had to emphasize one over the other, certainly it would be righteousness, lessons in righteousness. And then blessings is kind of assumed or included in there. We'll see how that works in a little bit, but lessons in blessing and righteousness. Why don't we go ahead and pray, ask for God to help us with this text in front of us here. Adam, would you pray?
Father, we are thankful for the church, for how you designed it to cause us to press on, to persevere to the end. You've given some as pastors and teachers, and we're now here to sit before the pastor that you set over us, and we ask that you would speak through your servant Chad, and that you'd give each one of us a word this morning from this chapter 18 in Genesis. Pray you grant him clarity in his speech. Take away all distractions. And cause these words to sink deep into our hearts. Amen.
Amen. Does anyone have a heading in their Bibles? In Genesis chapter 18, right in the middle. So most of you would have one there if you have one at all. What does it say? Abraham intercedes for Sodom. Anyone else have something different? Anything? Another heading? No one else has any other heading? No heading? Yes, no headings. Yes. But do you have the Reader's Edition? So anyway. So is that not often how we think of this text, right? I hope that the result of the message today, I hope that's not the result. One of the results, a minor benefit, would be if I just explode that idea in your mind, that you just don't ever think about that anymore, about Abraham interceding for Sodom. I hope to prove to you that is entirely not at all what is happening here. There's something far deeper, far more significant that's happening, far more weighty. But I've got to get there. So why don't we, I'll say a few words here, and then we will dive in and read the passage, and then we'll work through it. Today we're going to consider the last half of Genesis 18. That will be verses 16 down through 33. This portion of the chapter breaks down into two basic parts. In the first part, we have two short speeches from God. You might call them part 1A and 1B. Part 1A would be where God speaks to himself, explaining the logic of his decision to inform Abraham of the judgment that he's about to take. Why would I want to do this? Why am I going to do this? And then part 1b, God then announces to Abraham his intention to bring judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah. He then announces that. So he talks about why he's going to say this, and then he says it to Abraham. And that's the first part of this second half of the chapter. Then in part 2, we have a very curious discussion between Abraham and God, something of maybe what many people would call his intercession for them or a negotiation with God. I really don't like calling it that. It's actually very hard to categorize it. You might call it a conference, a discussion concerning what God is going to do in Sodom and Gomorrah. It really is more like that. It's more like a philosophical discussion or a moral discussion than it is an intercession. And so it's hard to categorize. There are several things that are going on here, which we'll get into later. But as we work through the passage, I want to urge you, as I read it, to make the Lord's declared purpose be the driving force behind how we interpret the text. The Lord tells us why it is He's going to talk to Abraham about these things. So everything that follows, we should be thinking God is trying to teach him these certain things in the whole discussion. God just has one agenda here. And Abraham's wrestling through it, and God's not surprised that he is, but as he is, God just keeps trying to convey to Abraham these things that he wants him to know. And so let's let that drive our interpretation. What does God say God's up to? Well, let's take that as our cue and understand the text in light of that. So anyway, so what I mean to say then is that verses 17 through 19 will drive our interpretation of what is happening. So let's just read the text then. Then the men set out from there. Remember, they'd had this meal with Abraham, and they'd announced to Sarah all that was going to happen, and God had just reminded Sarah his last words to her, "No, but you did laugh." And then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know." So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered and said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." And again he spoke to him and said, "Suppose 40 are found there." And he answered, "For the sake of 40 I will not do it." Then he said, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there." He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." He said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." He answered, For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. And then he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answered, For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham. And Abraham returned to his place. All right. It is a curious text. It's a bit humorous in a sense when we read the way that Abraham has been, kind of keeps going back with a lesser number. But I hope to show you he's not wasting the Lord's time as he does this. Let me point out to you also two other things that happened later on in Genesis, two other verses that I think are insightful here. One of them is Genesis chapter 19 and verse 27. The next thing we hear about Abraham is in this text. And it says, this is when God destroys the cities. Verse 27, And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold. You see, so just it shows you that Abraham has a keen interest in what God set out to do, what happened there in that place. So there's that. And then also in verse 29 is the other text I want to draw your attention to. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. And that text is also insightful for us, and I think it's insightful in this way, and you may disagree, and that's all right, but it does help inform the interpretation I'll take in Genesis chapter 18, and that is that one of the concerns that Abraham had that God was remembering was specifically what would happen to the righteous if the city was destroyed. He brings that up, specifically Abraham does, but most of his petitions sound like, well, what if there's 50 that are righteous? Well, if there are 50 righteous, you'd think God would say, I would spare those 50. Because Abraham's saying, are all the righteous going to die too? And God doesn't answer that way. God says, actually, if there are 50 righteous, I'll spare the whole place. But then there's still, kind of in Abraham's mind, there's still kind of two alternatives. Either the whole place is spared or the whole place is destroyed. Well, what if there are 5 that are lacking? Now what happens to the 45? Are they going to die now because there's not 50? Well, for 45, I'll spare the whole place. Well, what about for 40? What about 30? What about 20? What about 10? Even for 10, if there are 10, I'll spare the whole city for the sake of those 5 or those 10. And there's not even those. And then what happens is God is remembering Abraham and thinking about Abraham and saying, I've got to get Lot out of here. And Abraham's got to know that Lot made it out. Because he's thinking about Abraham. So you just need to connect all of that together. And so I don't think it's a stretch to say that at all. I think that's exactly what the text means in verse 19, in 1929 when it says, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Abraham knew Lot was like Abraham was before, not a great guy, but no citizen of Sodom either. So this is why, in a large measure, Lot was delivered. It would not have been wrong for God to have destroyed Lot. Lot was a sinner, but it would have misspoke in a sense. God would have misspoke by destroying Lot when he was speaking to Abraham. He's got all these things he's trying to teach Abraham, and if he doesn't rescue Lot in the midst of that, then part of what he's trying to teach Abraham is missed. And so it's his remembrance of Abraham that causes Lot to be delivered entirely. Now, what do we say here? Let's just begin working through. Genesis 18:16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. We see here again, as I mentioned last week, some of the hospitality of Abraham demonstrated. He's gone out of his way to go over and above what was expected of him. Though admittedly at this point the secret's out and he knows who's come to visit him. So in a sense you can't, he may have entertained angels unaware, but he's not doing so now. And so going out to send them on their way, we can't just credit him as an act of random hospitality. It's very much, in one sense, even an act of worship, right? To go and provide to the Lord and to these visitors who are with him all that they may need on their journey. But it is, at the same point, it's just Abraham following through with what he'd already had begun in good faith. He's just continuing in that way. Surely, if you remember, this is likely the time when all the bread is loaded up for these men on their journey. Sarah's job is done, and these men receive the reward of her work. Now, notice also that the conversation which is about to take place, it says, and Abraham went them to set them on their way. It's a ways off from the tent. How far, I don't know, but I would imagine probably about as far as when Abraham first saw them. They likely, just the way you would travel through there, they likely were traveling from the north south on their way through, and so maybe he sees them. Literally, they could have gone a couple different ways. But anyway, he sees them. They're coming one way. Maybe he sees them out there. He goes to get them. They come. They have all the meal and things. Then he goes out. They're passing out this way. He goes as far as he can with them on their journey, and has this to set them on their way, and they have this conversation. We have this in different towns. I remember when we went to Chicago for a family trip years ago, my brother took us as far as the train station, right, and set us on our way. So just whatever, it wasn't at the door of the tent. That's what it wasn't. He went out there some way. So if you're just thinking in terms of where we are physically, some distance from Abraham's tent. Now, verses 17 and 18. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." So, what do we say about this? The Lord evidently wants Abraham to understand what he is about to do, right? He doesn't want to just for Abraham to be left to his own devices to think about how God acted. And there's good reason for that, because we find as soon as it's announced to Abraham, Abraham has all kinds of questions and all kinds of things he's not thought through yet as a believer, and he needs to begin thinking about. And it's a good thing that God came to him ahead of time to allow Abraham to give Abraham a proper way to interpret what God was going to do. We all need the same thing. I mean, we find this again and again in Scripture. God's going to bring judgment upon some people, and it's announced ahead of time so that God's people can understand more about the character and ways of God, and they know how to think about what's happening around them. This is a tremendous help to us. So the Lord wants Abraham to understand what he's about to do. We find the Lord pleading with the disciples and explaining to them again and again and again about what right before he's going to, he's going to be arrested and go to the cross and rise again. It's like he gathers the group together and he begins to pour into them all that he can, all that they can stand at the time. And still half of it they miss, and he's got to go back and teach again later. But it's there. And they're getting ready to go through something that they need help to understand and to think rightly about. And so here the Lord is doing the same thing for Abraham. Now, we're not just told that he wants Abraham to understand. We're told the reason he wants Abraham to understand. Why does God want Abraham to understand what he's about to do? because Abraham is the one from whom will come a mighty nation, which will belong to God, right? This nation, it's not just a mighty nation, it's going to belong to God through the covenant and sign of circumcision. This nation is going to be a mighty nation. God wants Abraham to understand, not only because it will be a great nation. You think God might have an interest. Let's stop there. It's going to be a great nation. Might God have an interest in one of the nations that is a great nation in the world practicing righteousness and justice and knowing about the ways of God? Of course He would. That's reason enough. But it goes beyond that. It says, and God says explicitly, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. God's thinking about His redemptive purposes for humanity and the way that He needs a people to be shaped and influenced during this period of time from Abraham to when He's going to bring the blessing. And He wants them to be shaped by certain lessons that can be learned in this chapter and in the next chapter. He said, I don't want to hide this from them because it's important that these lessons be learned by Abraham, because I mean to actually follow through with the things I promised him to make him a great nation and to bring blessing to the world. And what needs to happen for that blessing to come? What does he say? Verse 19, for I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. I've got a golden opportunity, God is saying here, to teach him about righteousness and justice and how blessing will actually come to the nations through he and his descendants. This is a golden opportunity to teach him some valuable lessons. And so, I'm going to do it. And so this is what this is all about. There's such an important future in store for Abraham and the nation that will come from him, that God means to make sure that the opportunity for understanding God's ways and character that the destruction of Sodom provides him are not neglected. Don't miss out on these lessons. He doesn't want Abraham to miss out. Therefore, he's come to speak to Abraham about it so that Abraham might learn about God's character, about God's ways, specifically about His righteous character and His just actions. Right? For I've chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what He's promised him. Now, if you'll just let the weight of that sink in, it ought to freight the entire rest of this chapter with huge issues, theological issues. I mean, are not some of the great issues, theological issues of our time and of all time, just have to do with righteousness and justice? I mean, people say, one of the main objections people have to a belief in God? Well, why do bad things happen to good people? Right? This is the objection. If God can't be real because look at all the injustice, look at all the evil in the world, look at all these kinds of things. And then when God moves to judge, then they say, well, how could that have happened? How could God let that happen? And God's undertaking now to explain some of these things to Abraham. It's amazing. This is an important lesson, which ought to say at least, on level of application, that at least ought to tell us not to dismiss people's objections when they object on that basis. Because God also thinks, like, you don't understand God at all if you don't understand. And you don't have an adequate answer to that question. If you don't understand the righteousness and justice of God in the context of judgment and mercy, then you don't understand God. Another example of this, God told Moses this at another time, there up on the mountain. He declared to him who He was. He said, I in no way clear the guilty, yet I have mercy. Right? It's the same kind of thing. This goes to the heart of who God is. And God undertakes here to begin to explain it to Abraham so that he could keep the way of the Lord. So you got to know something about the ways of God if you're going to keep the ways of God. And so this text and this dialogue that goes on between Abraham and God is profound. It has to do with the character and the ways of God. And Abraham is learning these things for in many ways, for the first time or in a deeper way than he ever had before. We'll revisit all this here in a little bit, but you'll see that there are clear lessons from this passage that Abraham's descendants did, in fact, take with them. We could also give a list of some reasons for including Abraham in this secret plan of the Lord. Different commentators all have kind of said different things, and there's a couple of them here which I think are helpful. I'll just mention. This is a good way of thinking about things too. Because the nations of the earth are going to be blessed in Abraham, he is therefore concerned and has an interest in every act of divine mercy and judgment that takes place on the earth. Like if Abraham is the instrument through which God is going to bring blessing to the nations, then he ought to have a concern and a care about any time some of those nations are judged or given mercy. Like he needs to learn about these things and know about what God is doing. So it's proper for him to learn more deeply about God in these vital areas. Then another man said it this way. Abraham is included in this secret plan of the Lord so that Abraham may do his part to train his descendants to avoid the sort of sins that will exclude the people of Sodom and Gomorrah from ever receiving the blessing that God has in store for the nations. Think of that. I mean, here's the blessing. God says, I'm going to give this blessing to all the nations, all the families of the earth will have this blessing. But before we get to the blessing, this nation of people is going to be wiped off the face of the earth. That's a tremendous warning. So, like, pay attention to the nature of their sins, because this is not, and make sure you instruct your descendants to steer clear of these sorts of sins and this sort of high-handed rebellion against God. So another possible reason to include him. I don't say that these things are mutually exclusive. I think all these things can be in there as reasons for God to bring Abraham in. But the whole episode demonstrates that the Lord's purpose for including Abraham was much needed. And listen to this. This is crazy when I think of this. I just went through the text and found what I felt like were key words, big concepts, big ideas that people wrestle with. When Abraham heard, when God said to Abraham, verse 20, this is what God says. Imagine just you hear this conversation. You know that God is thinking this way. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Abraham hasn't heard anything about the judgment of God yet. Think of that. God didn't say, and if not, I will know, but if so, I will destroy them all. God didn't say that. Abraham just knows it intuitively. It's incredible. God didn't say, I'm going to destroy them. He just says, because, why is God here doing this? Why are these angels here? Well, because this tremendous outcry has come up to the Lord against Sodom and Gomorrah. It's great, and their sin is very grave. And so he wants to see, is that really, is all the complaints I've heard, is all that has risen up to me, is it all accurate? If it's not, I'll know that it's not accurate. That sounds almost like someone hoping it's not accurate, right? It sounds like, I mean, right? Don't you think that? If your boss talked that way, if you had some complaint against a coworker or something, and you made the complaint to your boss, the boss would come in and say, "Well, I'll look into it and I'll see, and we'll see. And if it's not as bad as you say it is, I'll know it's not as bad as you say it is." The idea is that they're thinking maybe it's not that bad. So already God is involving him in this idea of mercy in the midst of judgment. But this sets Abraham's mind in thinking about all sorts of different things. So let me just list them out. I think it's something of a crisis of faith for him. It involves him in a deep searching concerning judgment, concerning justice, concerning righteousness, wickedness, equality and equity and fairness, mercy, the forbearance of God, the creator-creature distinction. He says, I who am but dust and ashes have ventured to speak to you. It involves him in testing the patience of God personally. It involves God's willingness to condescend to the needs of a man. Those are huge issues. And Abraham is dealing with all of them in these questions. So it's profound for Abraham. It's no wonder that it says, so the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Just standing there. And we don't know how much time goes by, but then the next verse, then Abraham drew near and said. It's as though God is just kind of waiting. He said this and he knows. Abraham's thinking, he's stewing over these things. He's not comfortable with this. He doesn't know what to say. It's shocking to him. Oh, yep, now he's wrestling with that issue. Now he doesn't know what to think here. Now he's got all this other group of questions. What's he going to say? How's he going to form his question? Then Abraham draws near and speaks. He's wrestling with a lot. And he's not pleading that God not destroy the city. His question is, what's going to happen to the righteous people? You're not going to kill them with these other people. He doesn't ever even plead for Sodom. This is the thing. And my Bible has a heading, Abraham intercedes for Sodom. And he never does. It's the one thing he never does. He's never arguing with God to pardon the wicked. God just says he'd be willing not to pardon them, but to forbear their execution, to extend it to another time for the sake of the righteous. He would spare the city if there were righteous people there. It's amazing. All right, so I'm getting ahead of ourselves here a little bit. So let's back up then to verses 18 through 21. Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. So just consider what is announced here. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very great. Anybody think of some other places in Scripture where something cried out to God in this way?
Blood of Abel.
Blood of Abel, right. Genesis 4:10, right? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. What a thing. Remember, the people of Israel cried out to God for deliverance because of the treatment of the Egyptians, the way they treated them. It's quite a thing. Now, God says he heard it and he knew. When people are oppressed, they cry out to God. Even the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? Now they're all participants in this evil, but they're all, what does Scripture say? Hated and hating one another. Right? This is the reality. As evil as they all are, they're also equally bemoaning the evil of others. Right? I've never met anyone who treated someone else badly, who didn't feel in many ways they were justified, or the other person asked for it, they deserved it. Well, what about these other people? They treated me this way. And I can always point the finger. And you can be sure they could do the same in Sodom and So, but they weren't worshipers of God. They weren't crying out to God. Well, they were crying out to God, the God they didn't know, the God they didn't care to serve or worship, the God of their imaginations, some God. Certainly they'd be crying out to Him. What else? We might say cry out to God. How about the wailings of grief, the screams of the terrorized? These join the cry. You can be sure from the story that follows in chapter 19 there were many terrorized, many abused, much grief. So God says what? I'm going to go down to see whether they have done all together according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Now, someone threatening judgment, you might think, would speak in a different way. They might think, and if they've done the half, I will destroy them all. Right? What do you think? I mean, if you're eager for judgment, you say, I've heard about all this, and if they've done, even if half of it is true, I'll destroy them all. Now, we know, due to the nature of God's righteousness, that if they've done the half, they will be destroyed. God does not dwell with the wicked. He cannot, I mean, He has indignation every day. But that's not what He says here. Here He says, and if it's not all together, if they've not done all together according to the cry that's come out to me, then I'll know. I'll know the difference. I'll know if one report wasn't true. What a thing. Now, this is a manner of speaking, right? We're not to understand from this that God is in the dark about what their sins really are, right? This is for Abraham's benefit. Why are the angels going down there? Because Abraham needs to know that they really examined everything. Now, when the angels got there, we know from the story we'll look at later, how much did they look around town and examine and interview everybody? They didn't. They just encountered a situation that demonstrated quite thoroughly how bad things were. But it was all known to God. The point of the investigation being reported to Abraham was so that Abraham would understand that when God did judge, He was going to take absolutely every detail into account, and the judgment would be rendered with perfect justice and equity. But it opens the door that things might not be so bad, that they might not deserve absolute judgment. If it's not altogether as bad, or according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Again, God has no need to investigate, but Abraham has need of knowing that God does not judge on hearsay or without taking into account every last detail of a situation. And then what are there some other things that Abraham needs as well? Moving on here. Verse 22. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. So the Lord stays with Abraham in silence, it seems. It seems to me He's inviting Abraham to think through the news and the weight of it all, to form some sort of a question or statement for the upheaval that's happening in Abraham's soul right now to settle down, where he can begin to put sentences together and ask questions. And surely that's the purpose. We might just ask, maybe to personalize it, add some weight to this for you all. I mean, has there ever been a situation in your own life, some news you hear, or some event that happens that just, it's like, spiritually speaking, you get a sledgehammer to the chest, right? You just don't know what to do, what to make of things God has said. Everything is just, it's like everything's up for grabs, and you don't know heads or tails, you don't know what to do. And you can't live in that spot, right? I mean, you've got to get answers right now. That's why I call it something of a crisis of faith for Abraham. He begins to bring up all these issues that are the right issues to bring up, but they're the kinds of things that, it seems like as a believer, for myself, as I've studied through these things and spent, just time growing as a believer and had to wrestle with things, I don't think I would have to ask these questions the way Abraham does. I don't think it would be a concern. I mean, I would have concerns. Maybe there'd be things that come up, but I don't think these would be the things that come up anymore, because I've settled these things. Now, I'm not in Abraham's shoes exactly, so I don't know. But Abraham is still at the point here. He's still pretty early in terms of his really learning of God, walking with God, knowing the Lord. He's got to learn these ways of the Lord. And if Abraham learns them and passes them on to his children, and they get incorporated here in the Scripture, and then spiritual descendants of Abraham begin to pour over these things, they also learn these lessons. And they learn, and if you've read through this many times, you might come into this text having already learned the lessons that Abraham's about to learn. Good. They're necessary lessons. But we all have the same kind of thing. I mean, these may not be the burning issues for you right now. Right now, there might not be any burning issues for you. But there are times when things come to a head, and you have to get an answer, and you can't let God go until you figure this thing out. God makes plain to you what you need to know. You may not always make it, though, right? With Job, he didn't. With Job, it was essentially just, you be Job and I'll be God. And that was enough. But he needed God to address him and deal with his soul. And this is what happens for Abraham. What does he say? Then Abraham drew near and said, you wonder, what was it, an objecting voice? Will you indeed, or was it a whisper? Will you indeed do? I mean, what? I don't know. How did it come through? Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? It's like he's shocked, right? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the sake of 50 righteous who are in it? And he said these two questions. I mean, they sound pretty accusatory, don't they? Will you indeed? Are you actually going to do this? Are you going to sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it. And so then it's like he's put the questions out there, and he's still forming it in his mind. As far be it from you to do such a thing. And no, you won't. That's not you. That's not what God would be like. To put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked? Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Right? He's heard God said he's going to go there, and if it's as bad as if the bad deeds in Sodom are as bad as they've been reported, the city will be destroyed. And Abraham's saying, well, what about the righteous people in there? If there are 50 righteous, will you not spare that place for them? Will you not spare it for the 50 righteous? Like, don't bring judgment because of the 50. What would happen to the 50 righteous? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Right? I will spare the whole place. He's willing to spare it. Abraham's not wrong. Yes, God plans to destroy the place, but he won't do it if there are 50 righteous there. God's not so unjust as to do that. Abraham answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. You see, he gets a very real sense of, it's like he just was wrestling with, would God do that? And God says, no, of course I wouldn't. And this realization of how unfit Abraham is to be questioning God at all. Like, I had in my mind that God might act in this way. I was concerned, and he wouldn't ever act in that way. And I've been reminded of that now, and as I'm reminded of his character, I'm also reminded of who he really is. and I'm who I am in light of that. Here is God. I've undertaken to speak with God, and who am I? I'm but dust and ashes. So he takes the humble position. And yet, he can't deny the fact that he's still wrestling with this. Okay, for the sake of 50, he won't, but let's suppose, Lord, you go down there, and 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? Which is an odd way of speaking. I mean, he's not going down there to destroy the city for lack of 5 righteous people. He's going down there to destroy the city for all the evil that they've done. But Abraham kind of is phrasing it this way because this is how Abraham is thinking about it. I mean, Abraham's concerned about the righteous that are there. And if there's 45, are those 45 going to be destroyed because they lack 5 in number? Is that what's going to happen to them? You destroy all of them for lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. So again, God's going to not destroy this. Even the whole city will be spared if there are 45 righteous. Don't worry about the 45 being overthrown. I'm going to extend grace even to these others. Again, he spoke to him and said, suppose 40 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of 40, I will not. And we read this and it just sounds like Abraham is just like, why didn't he just jump to 10 or something? But the idea is, it's like this gradual process. He's thinking for 45, God would spare all of them. I wonder, I mean, would he be willing? You think even if there were 40, do you think he'd be willing to? Would he forego judgment for the sake of 40 righteous souls? They're not going to be, if there were 40 of them, then they wouldn't even be overthrown? I mean, how many righteous people does it take to stay God's hand of judgment? If there are 9 righteous people, are you out of luck? God's not going to look to 9. But if you had 10, then God would notice you and He'd preserve your soul. He'd spare you from judgment. This is where it starts with 50. And then Abraham's thinking, well, what about, okay, for 45? I would spare them all. Well, he probably wouldn't spare them all for 40. What about if there were 40? Would you spare the whole city for 40 and all these righteous, 40 righteous would not undergo judgment? And are you telling me you would extend it even then? Yes. That's incredible. I don't know any king who would do that. What about, what if there were 30? What if there were even less than 40? What if there were 30? What if there were only 30 people who had not partaken in these sins the way these other men had? There are only 30 of them who were righteous. Would you even then be willing to spare them? If there were only 30, what's he thinking? Maybe then you would bring judgment upon the city, but they might escape, or maybe they wouldn't even escape. Maybe that's not enough. What's God like? Yeah, do it for 30. That's crazy. 30. What's the question you want to ask Him? What's the question you want to ask God now? You want to get to what about for 1? Like you want to get to that place, but he never makes it, but he just kind of keeps asking, and he stops. I think because by the time he gets to 10, he's satisfied. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went His way when He had finished speaking with Abraham. I don't think God said, for the sake of 10, I won't, and I'm out of here. Like, I don't think He just took off and Abraham's like, wait! I think Abraham, it's resolved. This is played out enough times. He keeps reducing the number that he's, okay. All right. God's not going to judge. He's satisfied. God will not judge the righteous with the wicked. The thing I halfway accused him of maybe getting ready to do, the wicked, the righteous and the wicked are not going to fare the same. God will distinguish when He judges. And He will take everything into account. And He will examine the heart of every man. And every man will give an account and answer for his own sins. And this is the kind of thing that's happening in Abraham's mind. He's getting clarity on all these points that are so important. I mean, this is the kind of stuff when we go through Romans, we're wrestling with and saying, oh, I don't understand. What is Paul saying? It's so hard. It's so difficult. Abraham's wrestling with those issues right here. And he's trying to take his big theological questions to God, which have massive implications if you answer one way or the other way on what God is like. He's taking them to God, wanting God to answer them, but reminding himself that I'm just dust. I don't have a right to question you on these things, but I've got these questions. And if you're going to stand here, that I'm going to ask. I want to know what you're like. And so here he is. What do you think? Well, I said, let's look at it in verse 33. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So the Lord goes on, and Abraham returns. Another reason we shouldn't think God cut off the discussion is because God invited the discussion. God came here in order to discuss. God was the one who made the announcement to Abraham so that Abraham would learn these lessons. He's not going to run off before Abraham learns the lessons. So his work is done, and he goes on. And Abraham, satisfied with the answers he's received, comes back to his tent. Evidently, there are some things that it's not said explicitly necessarily. We're dealing with righteousness and justice and judgment and mercy and those kinds of things, but nowhere does the text say, and thus Abraham learned the following from God that day. I'm not told that. But we do know it has to do with righteousness and justice and keeping the way of the Lord and bringing blessing to the nations. It has to do with those things. Well, so I thought I would just take from Scripture some of the lessons that the people of Israel took with them concerning the destruction of Sodom. I think we find the following lessons, at least, in Scripture. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Timothy 2, "First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way." First reason to pray for such people that Paul mentions, kings and those who are in high positions of authority, is that we may live a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. One of the things that you learn in this text is that God may in fact spare a whole people for the sake of the righteous who are in it. Spare a whole people for judgment. I mean, we can look out and we hear all the time around us Christians and other people saying, right, the evil of our nation, right? And the temptation is in a bit of patriotism to say, well, we're not that bad. Like, yeah, like we're really bad. There's a lot of really, really bad things that our country does in the world. And that our country does among ourselves, right? It's bad. And in a lot of ways it seems to be getting worse. And Christians will talk about God's going to judge us, you know, and you'll see those signs, you know, 2 Corinthians 7, you know, if my people, you know, called by name will humble themselves and pray, then and it's like, I think that's a real misapplication of that text. But don't let your frustration with people misapplying one passage keep you from doing this. Pray. Why? Pray for the people, for kings and all who are in high positions, anybody who's in a position of influence and authority. Pray for them. Why? So that we might live a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. That's one reason to pray. That they'd make different decisions so that God would further spare us from judgment. It's not wrong for us, think of this, to pray that God would spare judgment on this nation for the sake of the believers in this nation. Right? And we pray that way a lot of times in our prayer meetings. Right? That God would, yes, we deserve judgment, but Lord, spare the nation. Because we're situated in it in such a way, one, it would be hard for us, but two, there's much that we can do, situated the way we are, if we'll take advantage of it. And then Paul goes on, this is good. This is a good thing to pray that way. And it's pleasing in the sight of God. And he twists it here. He takes an unexpected twist. In the sight of God, our Savior. So you're praying to God that He would, for the sake of those who are kings and in high positions of authority, so that they would make the right decisions, partner, make the right treaties, do these right things, so that you can live a quiet, peaceful life. You're praying for policy and things like that. And then God says, and Paul says, but also be praying to God for them, because He's not just God to you, He's Savior. And as such, what does He say? Who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. So the second reason you pray for such people is that they would be saved. That they themselves, not just that they would make decisions so that your life is easier, but they would make decisions so that they themselves are saved. You want them to come to God. You want them to be able to avoid the judgment. Consider also the words of Jeremiah to the exiles of his day. Jeremiah 29:7. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. They're out there in judgment and exile. Seek the welfare of that city. And pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. Imagine if all the Israelites went out there to that city of exile and said, God, judge this place. Bring famine upon the land. And God's saying, that's not a good idea because you live there. You don't want that. You don't want to invite my judgment upon that place. You pray for that place, because in its good, you'll find your good. That's one thing you see, is that God may spare a whole people for the sake of the righteous who are in it. That's remarkable. So we have all these ideas of God's justice tied in here in the text. Let's look at this. Let me just go on here. Another point. I'm not sure exactly how best to say it, but or how to summarize it. People who want to enjoy God's blessing must promote righteousness and justice in the world. Why was this judgment going to come upon Sodom? Because they were unrighteous. They were wicked. They were exceedingly sinful. That's why. If you want to enjoy God's blessing, you've got to be on the other side of things. You can't be one of them. In that sense, you need to, in your own personal life, be someone who promotes righteousness and justice in the world, who stands for those things, who practices those things. As you do so, then you can make an appeal to God for His judgment, to preserve the righteous. Right? You know that God will withhold judgment for the righteous remnant that remain, but there's got to be righteous people to remain. This is true not only for Israel, but for all people in general, that we would learn that through righteousness we can continue in God's favor. But this is a tricky thing, too. I mean, if you begin looking at this and say, well, God's going to judge the wicked, it's like, and the righteous will be spared. In one sense, we can say, well, who's righteous in Sodom? Really, no one. Perfectly. I mean, even then, even righteous Lot, right? Scripture says. Righteous Lot. It's like, well, we don't get too much further before we see lots of problems with Lot. And we already have seen some problems with Lot, the way he chose the land that he did, the way that he did. But here's another one. Think of this. Even the one who's pleading with God about other righteous people is one himself who's not righteous, but who's been counted righteous on the basis of faith. I mean, it's incredible. Abraham himself has got plenty of things we can look to where he's messed up. And he's the one here pleading with God about the nature of righteousness and justice and how God would act. It's amazing. Like, even in this context where we can talk about the way that God judges according to perfect justice, but if anybody's going to be spared, we need this whole thing to be blanketed with mercy. We need the mercy of God. The righteous in the city need the mercy of God to be spared. We all stand in this condition. What else do we see in this text? Or in this not just this text, but in this episode, if I were to fast forward all the way through the judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, what happens? We could look back and say, what have we learned? And there's some things that Scripture tells us. These are all lessons I think God wanted Abraham to learn. Turn with me to Ezekiel chapter 16. I'm going to say here, this is God's concern for the poor and needy, for the alien and the stranger. Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 49. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. So I removed them when I saw it. Samaria has not committed half your sins. What a thing. That's amazing. Now, I'll say there, God's concern for the poor and needy, the alien and the stranger. What do we have here? Sin of Sodom. Well, it's not exclusively this, but it's identified here as this. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. That's kind of terrifying in a sense. Think about that one. That one of the things that's singled out here by God as one of their greatest sins was what? They were so proud. They had excess food. They had prosperous ease. It would have been so easy for them to help people, to care about others, to do justice, to plead the cause of the widow and the orphan and these kinds of things. But what happens? They did not aid the poor and needy. This matters to God. Why do you suppose that what it is that when judgment came, it came in the form of strangers who needed shelter in Sodom? I mean, it's amazing. They know nowhere to sleep. How would the city treat them? And that, in that, you see how clearly Lot is distinguished from the rest of Sodom. For all Lot's failures, he was sharply separated from the people of Sodom on that point. The story of these visit to Sodom by these angels is meant to do the same thing for us that Cain's slaughtering of his brother is meant to do, that Lamech's poem is meant to do, that the report about the sin of mankind with the daughters of men and the sons of God is meant to do. It's meant to shock you at the lengths that mankind will go in their wickedness. And no one is supposed to read, Genesis chapter 19 and think, why would God judge a people for that? I mean, you're meant to, and just case closed, wipe them off the face of the earth. And that's what happens. No one is meant to read that text and think, well, I wonder if they really deserved all that. It's done. And the sins that are brought up there, there's a number of them. But you could, I think we said you could fairly summarize it, is that for all the prosperity that they had, because we knew earlier from Genesis that was the better land, that this was the place where you wanted to be in terms of what you could get physically. But for all that they had, look at the way they treated those who sought refuge there. It's unbelievable. That's a fair representation of a lot of what happened there. And that's the way it's described here. God's hatred for haughtiness. It's mentioned there in Ezekiel. That's also Isaiah chapter 3, verse 9. You can turn there if you like. I'll just read this. Isaiah 3:9. For the look on their faces bears witness against them. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them, for they brought evil on themselves. Just relishing in their sin. It's frightening. And you know people like this. And I would, if we're honest, I think we could say that there's times when we kind of relish in our own sin. I mean, there's where maybe you make some comment or you laugh about something that happened and you realize later, like, that was really wrong. Here it is. For the look on their faces bears witness against them. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Just proud with all these high-handed sins. What a thing. Well, what else was the sin of Sodom? Well, in Jude, verse 7. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. That's the other thing that strikes you as a story, is the sexual immorality and the pursuit of unnatural desire. And we'll get into those things when we go through that chapter. God's concern for the order that He's set up is real. They serve as an example by undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Let that be a resounding echo in your ear when you think of this. I mean, there's a reason that Paul says, don't be deceived. Those who practice sexual immorality will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. This is what it is. Let Sodom and Gomorrah be an example and all those cities surrounding there. Those who indulge in sexual immorality and pursue unnatural desire have undergone a punishment of eternal fire. That's a lesson to be learned. What else? Another lesson in Scripture. The suddenness of God's judgment when it comes. That's something you should be thinking about when you go through Genesis chapter 19, the suddenness of God's judgment when it comes. Luke chapter 17, from the mouth of Jesus, He's going to give you a lesson here about Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 26, Luke 17:26, just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking and marrying and being given in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Verse 28, likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. What a thing. You don't think about the angels walking into town and there being 2 building projects going on, and guys trading in the market and city square and things like that. You don't think about it like that. That's what was happening. And some guy broke ground the week before on his new barn, or what, to build a fence or build his house for his bride, right? To be, I mean, maybe Lot's soon-to-be sons-in-law, maybe they were busy building a home for their brides-to-be, never to sleep in. God's judgment comes suddenly. It took a long time to get there, but when it came, it came. I mean, He just announced it to Abraham, and the next morning the smoke is rising up from the cities. That's amazing. What else? One of the biggest lessons, I think, the most helpful lessons, there's 2 more I'm going to look at. Second to last, is that the righteous will be delivered from God's judgment upon the wicked. The righteous will be delivered from God's judgment on the wicked. 2 Peter chapter 2. Here's another physical descendant of Abraham telling you what you should think about what happened to Lot. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7. And if God, if He rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw in him. If God can do, if he can rescue righteous Lot, who was so greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. Verse 9, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority. God is able to rescue the godly from trials, he says. If God could do it with Lot, then he can do it with you, with all the righteous. He knows how to rescue you from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. God knows how to do that. And that's an example to you. One of the things you should be thinking about when you think about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the deliverance of Lot is that God knows how to do that kind of thing. God can bring judgment on people and just you get out of the nick of time. God can do these things. He can rescue the righteous from trials. Keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. So that's a lesson to be drawn. Surely something that Abraham learned whenever he heard of Lot's survival and escape at the insistence of the angels. Last thing to say. The influence that the righteous may have on the wicked. It's deep and it's significant. Lot was able to rescue his daughters. That was it. But they were spared. And if he hadn't insisted they go with him, they wouldn't have been spared. But they were spared. But it's sometimes a very small circle. His own wife didn't make it. His sons-in-law didn't make it. The city didn't survive. It's not always a small circle. Sometimes it is. The last thing I want to do is to compare and contrast two things here occurred to me. You remember when God came, there was a certain prophet named Jonah. God came to him with a message for a certain city named Nineveh, and it was evil, and it had a reputation for being very, very evil. But God came to Jonah with a very different message than God came to Abraham with. To Abraham, God said, I'm just going to go over there and see how bad it is. And if it's not all that bad, then I'll know. And Abraham knows, if God is the way God is, judgment's going to come. And he begins to be very concerned about the righteous in that city. Jonah, on the other hand, is just, God says, well, go tell him that I'm going to judge him. And it's as though Jonah has, learned the lesson that Abraham learns, in a sense. It's like his heart's not right, but it's like, if I go over there, God might spare some people. And I hate all those Ninevites. So he doesn't want God to, he refuses. He wants judgment. He's more bloodthirsty than God is, right? He's more out for vengeance than God is. He's not as righteous as God is, as just as God is. He doesn't want them to have an opportunity to repent. He wants them to suffer. So he leaves. It's amazing. Abraham's heart was totally different. Concerned that there may be some that are righteous in the city that would be swept up in the judgment. And Jonah just doesn't care. Kill them all. What a thing. How differently God dealt with both men. It's really something. So, I think the takeaway, I guess, on that is, what was the, he said, it's God had this thing he was going to do. He was going to judge this city. But he had an opportunity when he judged them to also accomplish something else, to teach Abraham something about his character. So he wanted to do that. Why teach Abraham about his character? Or what's he going to do? He was going to teach him about righteousness and justice. Why? So he could instruct his descendants about the way of the Lord. Why? So that he could bring blessing to the world. That's why. That was the whole point. So that all that he promised Abraham could come to pass. That he really could bring this blessing to the nations. And it's like even in announcing judgment, God has in view all this mercy. The same way with the Lord, there he is warning people all the time about the judgment to come. Flee. Repent. The kingdom is near. Believe. It's always this way with God. Why do we know judgment is coming now? It's not just so that we can say, well, it's coming. I mean, so that we can respond. We can hear the warning. It's exactly that. It's a warning. It's not just an announcement. It's a warning for us. Take heed. Abraham responded, I would just say, so well. It's so encouraging thing. He heard these things. He began wrestling with this stuff. He spoke with God about it, and he was just almost ashamed to even accuse God of these things. And yet it's what he felt God was saying. And he just, what is going on? How can this be the way? By the time it's all done, he's learned so much from the Lord. It's a really pivotal text. But again, you see how he's not interceding for Sodom, like at all. He's not trying to convince God not to judge Sodom. He's concerned about the way that God executes justice and how it affects the righteous. How God distinguishes the righteous and the wicked. And how mercy is factored in. It's almost philosophical. It's not. I mean, it's theological, but he's wrestling with all these kinds of issues. And he's getting to do it with God. That's so encouraging. What a thing. If you are frustrated a bit by the indirectness of his questions and how he doesn't just go right at it, just bear in mind he's standing before God. I'm not sure how well we gather our thoughts when we do that, right? He's a little bit shaken by the news, shaken by the one standing before him. Well, are there questions or comments on this text? Well, take it with you. Right? God wanted Abraham to learn these lessons badly. And he doesn't mean for us to forget them. So this is your invitation by God to search out these issues. Right? Righteousness, justice, mercy, equity, judgment. You should be thoroughly versed in these things. Believers ought to know these issues inside and out. It's very important to God that we understand them. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for these truths, for this story, for the things you revealed to Abraham, for the way that this isn't your last word even about justice and judgment and mercy and wrath and all these sorts of things. You've actually said a lot to us in your word. I suppose for those of us who are believers and have walked with you for some time now and taken advantage of the truth of your word, that really what we're learning in this text is just the way you were so concerned that Abraham learned these things. We know you've taken steps that we might learn them. But it's a comfort, and it's stirring. It provokes us even to study more, to learn these things more thoroughly, to see the way you were so concerned that Abraham know you in this way as well. Somehow this knowledge was essential, and this conduct was essential to bring about the blessing of justification to all through the Lord Jesus Christ. Help us, Lord, to lay hold on truth and to not let it go, to seek for wisdom, to fear the Lord. Ask for the rest of our time together that it be redeemed and put to use, to kingdom use, Lord.
In the name of Christ, we ask these things.